I've been writing code for about 15 years or so, just primarily for myself. My wife and I operate a business here in town, and so I handle our website for us pretty much. I started using a Raspberry Pi. I started experimenting with the Raspberry Pi, I guess, when they first came out. I started with the Raspberry Pi B. Then I tried a Vico Bone Black. And then I got this Raspberry Pi version 2 about 3 weeks ago. I've been using it on and off, just trying things out lately. I was telling Al when he first came, I've been using this now for my desktop computer for about the past, I guess, about 5 days, because I had some trouble with my laptop earlier. And for my needs, it works pretty well. It's not the fastest thing around, but if you just need a text editor and look things up on the web, it works pretty well. The basic Raspberry Pi comes with just the board. You need usually some kind of case. You'll need a small micro SD card, about at least 4 gigabytes, preferably 8 at the minimum. They recommend a class 10 for high-speed use, and it works. And in my experience, that works pretty well. And of course, you need a USB keyboard and a USB mouse, and it has an HDMI connector for connecting the monitor. You could also connect it to a regular monitor using DVI cable. You have to have an HDMI to DVI adapter, but it connects right that way as well. And they also have a composite video out terminal as well. So if you've got an old analog TV, you can actually connect that directly to a TV that way also. I've been using it with a 20-inch LCD TV, and it works great. I had no problem with that. Let me shut this down first. I'll show you what it's like when you boot up. Let's see, shut down. Let's reboot. It gets powered off of a micro USB cable. I'll just restart this here. And you have to have your TV, it's critical you have to have your TV on, or your monitor on first when you first boot up, because it checks the HDMI settings and it adjusts automatically. If it doesn't put any HDMI on, it'll assume it's operating headless, and you won't get any display at all when you first connect it. When I first started using this, I got really confused because I'd plug it in and turn it on and nothing would happen. And finally I figured out you have to have the TV on first to make this work. So this is a startup script we've got running in the background. I can just shut this off for now. This is basically Debian Wheezy. This is an LXD environment. You've got, comes by default with Mathematica and Wolfram Alpha installed, and Scratch and Sonic Pi. I installed these other things like this Arduino Ide and this Pinguino thing, and a couple of it comes with both Python 2 and Python 3 already installed. I installed BPython, IronPython also. It comes with the standard default web browser they call Web. It's a rewritten version of Epiphany. It's pretty fast. It's faster than Firefox, actually, I find. Let's see here. Let's just pull up our company website. How about that? Let's see. I've got a scrolling image here, so it's going to take a little while to load. Well, maybe it's not going to load. Let's see, let's try this. Okay, here we go. So you can see it's not the fastest thing around, but if you scroll up and down quickly, you'll get some tearing sometimes. Let me see if I can Google it, for instance. Let's do and let's do See, if you scroll down too quickly, you'll get some tearing like that occurring, where the screen just kind of goes blank and it takes a while to catch up. But after it loads, it's not too bad. Let's see the settings here, so on. Generally, I find it's very responsive. You know, you don't get any kind of lag in the Macs. I find it works pretty good that way. But a few things are kind of slow to load sometimes. I find. So here's what Firefox looks like running it. Once that's loaded, it scrolls pretty well. You want to do like check inspect element, get Firebug tools pop up. So you can see the DOM there and everything. And see your CSS rules and so on. So it's not the fastest thing around. It's it's certainly slower than Intel would be, but it is, I think, relatively usable. They have various games installed. Minecraft is installed by default. Various Python games. Different file manager works pretty well. It's pretty quick. You can view things, compact view, and so on. And so on. What else here? I've installed a couple IDEs. Here's Arduino Ide. For programming Arduinos. It's relatively slow for booting up. It's got a Java backend, I think that's why. But once it gets started, it actually loads pretty quickly. You can see it's there. Another IDE I installed was for one called Pinguino. It's kind of Arduino clone. It's built using for microprocessors. It's written all in Python. The Pinguino IDE is, and see what that's like here. So there's the IDE. So you can see what those look like, and they have like, oh, let's see, let's try this. Kind of stuff, so close that. And let's see, graphics. It did not come with ImageMagick or Inkscape or LibreOffice installed. I installed all those. I thought was interesting was that they have no default software installer, as I could see. You know, there's no Synaptic or install or anything like that. It's pretty much all you can do from the command line. And so they have the usual, apt-get, get to install. Let's see. Oops. one thing I'm finding here is that this monitor is about twice the size of the one I have at home, and this seems to run a lot slower than it does on a 20-inch monitor. On a 20-inch monitor, things are about twice as fast. That's what I'm seeing here right now. I presume that's just because of the monitor size, the resolution, higher resolution in this one than the one I have at home. But let's see. Let's go back here. Let's do figures then. Here's LibreOffice. Let's see. Let's try. Let's do this document. You can see it, you know, once it loads, it's pretty quick, but it takes a little while for it to load. What else do we have here? I installed VLC, and that works well. Wi-Fi setup. When you first start it up, it won't automatically detect Wi-Fi. In fact, it comes with just a standard network port on it. There's no Wi-Fi adapter by default. And I've heard that on Raspberry Pis, the Wi-Fi adapter can be, if you just get a generic Wi-Fi adapter, it may not work. I bought one from a vendor that sells Raspberry Pis, and it worked right out of the box. I had no trouble with it at all. The Wi-Fi setup is here. Let's see, preferences, Wi-Fi configuration. And you can see, there's networks, do a network scan, and it'll give you all your Wi-Fi's, and you just choose the one you want, and then connect. And it's I've had it working. Once you have a network scan, it seems to work pretty well. It'll find everything pretty quickly. What else here? Note. Let's do this. Let's go back here. When you first boot up to it, well, I should explain. When you first get your Raspberry Pi, there's no software installed or anything on it, so you have to first write it to an SD card. And the Raspberry Pi website has images here you can download. Let's see here. The one they recommend you usually install is called Noobs, stands for New Out of the Box something. New Out of the Box System, I guess is what it is. Or you can install just straight Raspbian. I usually just go for Raspbian, and that works pretty well. It's about a 3 gigabyte download. Noobs includes Raspbian plus a few other ones as well. I've tried a few other ones, and I find Raspbian works about the best out of all of them. I've heard for the Raspberry Pi 2, there are some Ubuntu installations now that are available, some images that actually work faster than Raspbian. I haven't tried those yet. I've heard some people have had some difficulty getting everything working with them, so I've just stuck with Raspbian, and I've been pretty happy with that so far. Let's see, what else can we talk about here? Have you any other questions? No? Okay. All right. So once you get it installed, you want to generally run this thing called raspi config. Let's see here, sudo raspi config. Probably first thing you want to do is expand the file system, take over the entire SD card, so you've got the full SD card for writing to. Probably want to change your user password too. By default, your username is Pi and the password is Raspberry, so you probably want to change it to something different. There's a camera connector in here. If you want to connect a video camera to it, there's a particular camera connector. You can turn that on to make that work. You can do some overclocking. And they have this advanced options for controlling the monitor. If you want to set for a particular scan rate, that kind of thing. You can change your host. You can change your host name, set up SSH. I think by default you can set this up so that you can SSH into it remotely. I forget if that's turned on or off, or I forget how that's done. By default, the serial connection in here, which I'll show you later on, is set up so that you can connect to it remotely, like as a headless server by serial connection. If you want to use it as a serial import-output port, you first have to turn this off to make that work. I haven't actually gotten my serial connection to work yet, so I really can't say how well that works, but that's been my experience. Also, the SPI and the I2C ports on the output port are disabled by default. If you want to use those, you have to enable them. So you need to come here to do that. So anyway, I'll show you, let's see here. They have this 40-pin connector here. You can see that. There's across the top. There's also a camera connector here and a display for a touchscreen display. I'm going to zoom in on that. See that? Okay. I've just used the 40-pin connector for these are basically input-output ports and 5-volt and 3-volt power supply and ground. I haven't used the display or the camera ports at all because I don't have the equipment for that. To use the 40-pin input-output port, you need some kind of cable like that. This is a standard 40-pin cable, and it just plugs on like so. And then you can buy this adapter board for connecting to a breadboard. It basically, it's nice, it breaks out all these pins and it's labeled them, so it makes it really easy to breadboard with this thing. The cable plus this thing costs about $4. You do need to solder it together because these headers do not come actually on the PC board. You actually need to solder those on. But that just snaps in place. And then you can put it in a breadboard. Yes. You guys have much experience with breadboards at all? Some? Okay. So, breadboard. The Raspberry Pi, the pins are set up for 3.3 volt input output. They can't handle 5 volts. So if you're doing anything with a 5 volt like Arduino, you want to be careful because you can really destroy things that way. They also can handle, I think they can supply about 19 milliamps of power, somewhere around there. It's not a whole lot. So you want to be careful that you don't put a whole lot of power to it and destroy the board. There are 3 Python modules for controlling the input-output ports. The most popular one seems to be one called, let's just pull it, let's see. is this one called RPI.GPIO, and that's, if I recall, I think that was installed by default. You do not need to install that. So here's a simple program I wrote to just blink an LED, kind of the basic hello world type thing. Let's see, let's take this one off here, put that on pin 21. And we should be good to go. Yeah. Now to have access to the input-output ports, you have to run in a super user mode. So you also have to do Python pi, and I don't know if you can see that or not. See the LED blinking. So nothing too earth-shattering there.
Well, what did you say the name of the Python module was?
Sure, let me pull it up again. It's called RPI.GPIO.
Okay, and that's installed by is that part of the Python standard library, or that's something that
it's installed,
the Raspberry Pi OS included?
It's something that the Raspberry Pi OS included. It's part of Raspbian. And they have functions for input, output, and they have a software-based pulse width modulation. The Raspberry Pi has no onboard analog digital converter, so if you actually want to measure a voltage, you're going to need to use some other kind of microcontroller, either an Arduino or something like that. Which surprised me. When I first got this, I thought, well, great, I can try to measure things, but it actually doesn't have that. And the software pulse width modulation is not that great either. If you ever wanted to try to say run a stepper motor, it really probably wouldn't work because and I'll show you here in just a second. Let's see here. Let's do sudo. Let me first pulp that. Show you what it looks like. I'm going to get into the large. You know how to enlarge the font? Oh, there we go, there. Control plus, will that do it?
I think so.
Okay, try that. No, I won't. Let's see. Let me do it here. Preferences. Let's try this. Is that better? Can you read that? Okay. So now I lost my cursor. I can at least just JKL on someone. Okay, so. So to use this module, you first have to, the pins are numbered, and there are two different numbering systems. This really screwed me up at first. There's a board layout pin numbering system, and there's one based on the Broadcom chip. And when I first put this thing together, and they had the numbers on the side, on the breakout board, I assumed that was just the board numbering. And so I just put pin 21, started running, nothing worked. And it took me a long time to finally figure out, well, you have to actually use this different monitoring system. So whenever you see anything in the documentation where it says GPIO 4 or GPIO 5, they're referring to the Broadcom numbering system. And that would be, so to set that mode, you set it here by saying GPIO.BCM. Once you do that, then you can start setting up your pins, whether they're going to be input or output. So this is pin number 21 on here, the one in the corner. This is going to be an output pin. And then in this case, I'm setting this up to be for pulse width modulation. You all familiar with pulse width modulation? You know, on a digital system, you've got pulses. You know, you've got high and then low. And typically those go, they're equal periods. It's high for the same amount of time, then it goes low down to 0. voltage stays 0 for the same amount of time, then goes up to high, and that's usually how your pulse needed. So like when you're on your microprocessor on your computer, if you've got 2 gigahertz, it's going to go high and low like that for 2 million times a second, basically. In a pulse width modulation, it goes high, but then you can vary the duty cycle. It'll go high for a portion of the time, like say 10% of the time, and then be down to down 0 volt for 90% of the time. What that gives you the ability to do is it happens so quickly to your eye, it looks like it's a lower voltage. It kind of averages it all out. So here I'll show you, like on this pin here, I'll show you what it looks like when you try to flash it here. Let's exit this. And there. Got it. Super user. Okay, so now, right now you can see it's flashing like this. I'm going to turn it over here for a second. Now right now I've got it flashing at a frequency of 10 hertz, that's 10 times a second, at a duty cycle of 50%, which means it's on at approximately 50%. Now if I change the duty cycle to 100%, and back here, I'll see it changes the duty cycle to 100%. See, now it's on steady. It means it's at 100%. So now let's change the duty cycle to say 10%. And see, now it looks dimmer than it did before. Now let's go our frequency up to 1,000 hertz this time. And now see, it looks like it's on steady. And we can change the duty cycle now to 100%, and now it's much brighter. So if the flash rate is fast enough, you can't see it when it's off. But because it's on for a shorter period of time, it just looks dimmer overall. So that's one way you can adjust the brightness of something or the volume of something just by varying the duty cycle in a pulse width modulation like that. Now, like I said, this is a software-based pulse width modulation, which means that it turns it on and off while it's doing everything else at the same time in the background. So if you've got a bunch of things running in the background, sometimes it might miss a cycle or it might miss a pulse. And what you'll notice then, let's change our duty cycle here to say, let's go 20. I don't know if you can see it really well here or not. Let's see, let's change our frequency down to 100. Now, it works pretty well now, but when I tried it at home earlier, you could see it was missing a pulse occasionally. And I've heard people say that when you try to run a motor with this thing, like a servo motor or a stepper motor, you'll get a lot of missed pulses and it won't work well. So if you want to run a brushed motor, a motor with brushes, where you're just trying to vary the speed, that will work fine. But if it's something that's like you're going to try and run a CNC machine, this really wouldn't work out very well. You really need to run that through a microcontroller first with a built-in pulse width modulation that's dedicated strictly to pulse width modulation to make that work. Anyway, so that's that. Let's see here. Let's see what we got here. I'll do a little pipe.
You start pushing buttons, see if we can turn the lights on.
Yeah, sure. Let's do that. Should be. I think you need to hold it down, maybe.
That was the blinds.
There you go. What'd you do? here this is a bicolor LED. It's set up so if the voltage is higher on one terminal than the other, it'll be red. If you reverse the voltages, it'll turn green. So I wrote a little program here just to flash that. So I've got two pins here identified, 19 and 26. Again, I have a board mode to this Broadcom style again. And then I set those both to being output pins. So they both were made for output. And then I run a little for loop of 10 seconds long. I first turn this pin on and this pin off, that's true and false. And then I wait for half a second. And then I turn that pin off and this one on, so that the voltage on this pin is now higher than that one. And that's why the flash is red-green. So we'll do that again here. So it's like, and you can see it flashing that way. Now for input, you same procedure, you identify your pin, set your mode, and then you set up your pin for input this time. This is the pin number, this is now in input mode, and then you can set a pull up or pull down resistor. By default, it's in what they call a tri-state mode. It's either the pin is either high or low. So you can set a default mode, and when there's a change, then you can have it detect that. So here I'm using the same pin again, pin 21. This out. Now by default, I've got this pin set to being high, being up, and I've got a little switch. I'll press that switch to go on, it'll go down, and it'll say that the pin has changed. So we'll show you what that's like. Next. So now my input is high. I make this low. See, now it's low. Let go. Now it's back high again. So that's a pretty simple way of doing it. A more elaborate way is to use interrupts. So you can define a callback function here. Well, first we'll get back to that later on. Again, setting the pin, setting the mode, setting the pin to be input pin again. But now I have this function called add event detect, and it detects a change in the pin. And you can either check whether the pin is high, whether it's low, or have it detect both modes. And here I've got it detect both. And when that occurs, it calls this callback function called print message. And this is here and everything. This is just the pin has changed. And to detect pin switch debouncing, you can set the bounce time so that it takes care of any kind of missed breaks. And then I just run a while loop, and it just waits for you to press basically Q to quit. But while it's waiting for that pin to change state. And if it does, then it'll run this function. So we'll try that here. Python, sudo Python. So now it's just going to wait. Now, see it. If I hold it down, it says the pin has changed. I let go, pin's changed again. You know. Now I could have it check whether it was high or low, and have it do that as well. In fact, let's see if I can do that. Press Q to quit. So, trying to recall what the command is to actually check the pin status. Let's see. That is what is that? I forget. I'll have to call for now. Oh, let's just do this. Let's go here. Let's see here. That's something. Okay. Well, it should be. Here we go. It's high, it's low, high. Let's see. I'm missing some. There's a high, there's low. I think I've got some debouncing problems here. That's why I'm not getting a consistent number, but that's basically how that would work. Anyway, that's I guess about the basics of the input-output. Any other questions or anything I could talk about today that'd be of interest? You guys like to see? No?
So you can plug a bunch of different devices in and
Yeah.
do you play with anything else or just a few basic things like I've seen them plugged into like RC cars so they can do like tricks, you know,
Right,
all sorts
right,
of crazy
right.
stuff. I don't know if you've played with any of that.
I haven't. I think to do that kind of work, I think you almost would have to have that connected to an Arduino of some kind, because or at least some kind of accessory board, because by itself the input-output isn't powerful enough to control a motor just in and of itself. You need to really have something that could act as some kind of motor controller too. So I've just used it mostly just as a desktop computer and basically doing some basic input-output stuff like this is all I've done.
Since it runs on so little power, have you tried hooking up the batteries? How portable is that?
I got started using a Raspberry Pi because a few years ago I converted my office to pedal power. So I have a desktop where I have a generator so I can work on my computer and power my computer and everything else in my office while I'm working. And so this is actually why I wanted to try the Raspberry Pi, because it's so energy efficient. And I find that when I'm using it as a desktop computer with web browser running, Vim, the Raspberry Pi itself only draws about 1 watt of power, maybe 1.5 watts at the most. Whereas my monitor, my TV, draws about 15 watts. So running off battery shouldn't be any problem, really. I think as long as you've got a basic, enough background. I'm using, for my system I've got at home, I've got a 18 amp hour, 12 volt lead acid battery. I'm using basically to store power and as a buffer for the system. And heck, that thing can run for days, probably not, because it's draws so little power. But the biggest thing is the monitor point. That's where most of your power's going to go. Any other questions at all?
Are your code examples on GitHub or something?
I can do that.
That'd be
No
great.
problem. Sure. No problem at all. I can just put these up there. No problem. And the documentation on this is really actually pretty good. I do find that the Raspberry Pi community, there's a lot of information out there about how to do stuff. You just need to take the time to read it. The one thing you need to watch out for is that there's two versions, of course, the Raspberry Pi regular A. There are four versions of the Raspberry Pi. There's a Raspberry Pi A, which has 256 megabytes of RAM and no network terminal. There's the Raspberry Pi B that has 2 USB ports and a network terminal and 512 megabytes of RAM. And there's the B Plus, which is basically the same thing except it has 4 USB ports then, and I think it also has a micro. This is a B. This has a regular size SD card. I think the B Plus has a micro SD card, if I recall, and 4 USB ports. I just read today that the price of that one came down to $25. It used to be $35. That's now $25. And then there's the Raspberry Pi 2, which has 4 USB ports, a gigabyte of RAM, and a micro SD card. Let's see, the B and the B Plus only have 26 pins, input-output pins. The Raspberry Pi 2, they call it Raspberry Pi B2, that has 40 pins. And so you look at the board, you'll see that this is basically the same size. The big difference is just the number of pins there. Also, this is an ARM v6 processor. This is an ARM v7 processor. As I understand, the ARM v7 is much better supported than the ARM v6 in terms of Debian and that sort of thing. Also, the ARM v6 had a soft floating point processor. It's done in software. The ARM v7 is a hard floating point. It's actually built into the processor. It's supposed to be faster. I don't know that much about it to be able to say, but it's supposed to be a little bit faster. And also, this one runs, I think, I want to say like 900 megahertz. I think this one runs at 700, somewhere around there. So this is if you were to boot this up, I don't have an SD card to boot this up, but if I were to boot this up and show you what this is much faster than this was. This was not a workable desktop computer. It was great for, just for testing stuff out and that kind of thing. But this on a small monitor, it actually works pretty darn well for a little desktop computer. So I'd say definitely spend the extra $10 and get this one, not this one. And also, the BeagleBone Black is a little better than this, but definitely going to go with that one. The Raspberry Pi 2 is much better board. There's another board I have not tried yet, and that is the Odroid C1. That's made by a company called Hard Kernel. You can buy it for, I think, at $38, which is basically the same price. Has very similar specs to the Raspberry Pi 2. Has 4 USB ports. I think it has a 1 gigahertz processor, if I recall. So it's got a faster processor. And it has also an onboard eMMC memory board, right? So you can either use it. You can either load the operating system on an SD card and boot off that, or you can also do it on the eMMC, which is supposed to be much faster. I haven't tried that board yet. I'm tempted to. It runs Ubuntu. It does not run Debian by default. It's got an older kernel than Raspbian does. So if you want the latest software, you might run into problems with that board. Also, that board takes a 5-volt barrel jack to power it, whereas the Raspberry Pi 2 it just takes a mini USB cord. So if you've got phone charger, a fairly husky phone charger, you'd probably want to go with the Raspberry Pi 2 rather than using the Arduino. But so I haven't tried that one yet. I'm still thinking about that. I've been pretty happy with the Raspberry Pi. See anything else? Oh, one other thing. Printer support. If you want to use this thing as a desktop computer and you've got a printer, if you've got an HP printer, it works great because the HP printer is installed by default in the repository. You have to install cups, but once you have cups installed, the HP library is installed automatically. So like my wife has an HP printer, I pulled it off the network, it detected it off the network, I installed it without having to do any other installation. It worked great. But I've got a Brother printer, and Brother, they do offer Linux drivers for it. You can download it from their website, but they are compiled for an Intel processor, not for an ARM processor. Now, I've heard you can use QEMU and to somehow make it emulate a ARM processor, but I've not been able to get that work yet. It's been really frustrating because I really like my Brother printer. So if you're going to use this with a desktop computer, with a printer, I'd recommend using an HP or something like that where it has good Linux support. Don't go with the Brother. I haven't tried using the scanner on the HP. I don't think that should be a problem. Because I noticed when I installed the printer, it had the HP lip installed at the same time, which is their image processing, which should be able to do scanning as well. So as long as you install Xane, it should be able to scan and do all the kind of scanning stuff too, just as well. That I think is about all I can think of. Any other questions at all?
So you have an SD card for your memory and you run your OS and everything like that. How well does it handle then plugging like USB drives in? Like you want to put 64 gig USB drive in just to have additional storage, or?
I honestly haven't tried that yet. I will say I've had no trouble connecting keyboard or mice, plugging those up. It recognizes those all the time, no problem at all. I have not had any problem with the Wi-Fi adapter, but I wrote a program using my pedal generator to monitor the power I'm producing and how much power everything's using using a microchip microcontroller. Those microcontrollers have a built-in USB module. You know, on a typical Arduino, I'll show you this here. They have an Atmel processor on one side, but on the back side they've got a USB to serial adapter, a module, integrated circuit, strictly for that purpose. So they have this integrated circuit strictly for that purpose. On the microcontroller, you actually have to program the chip to do that, and it's a little bit sketchy sometimes to make that work with all computers. And I find, of all the computers I've tested that with, this Raspberry Pi is the most fussy. I've had to reboot a few times sometimes to get that thing to work right, to actually recognize my my microcontroller and start reading data correctly. I've tried. Sometimes it'll boot, won't recognize it. I unplug it and plug it several times. It will still not recognize it. I actually have to do a hard reboot on the board, and then it will recognize it. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a problem with my programming, or it's just that this thing's just touchy. I don't really know. So I don't know how it'll work with the USB drive. I haven't tried that yet. But my thinking is if it's a relatively decent USB drive, it should work okay. I think I'm more skeptical of my programming abilities for a USB than anything else, why that wouldn't work. I have tried this a few times with plugging this in with the Arduino. I've had no trouble at all getting it recognized and work right. So I think as long as you've got a fairly solid USB software for that, it should work okay. And as far as recognizing monitors, as long as the monitor is on first when you plug it in, it works great. I've had no trouble. The resolution's always worked out well on the couple I've tried. You can, here, let me show you a script here. Let's see here. They have a script that's set up. This controls the monitor settings when it first boots up. If you want to have it set to a certain monitor style, you can just go through and change this. I set mine up so that when I'm running my monitor at home, it'll just run these modes. All you have to do is just uncomment that. It'll automatically then set that monitor setting for that, even if the monitor is off. So if the monitor is off and you boot up, and then you turn your monitor on, it will recognize the display and everything work properly. But you have to look at the HDMI specs to know what this setting should be. It has to do with the screen size and whether it's, I do not know all about monitors. I had to read all that kind of stuff myself. But this is the critical thing to get right. You can leave I'd leave all this other stuff commented out, but these you have to have right to make this work. It's the HDMI underscore group and HDMI underscore mode to actually have that work with the monitor. I'm told, from what I've read, that the Raspberry Pi recognizes what they call CEC commands. Do you know what those are? If you have a TV home entertainment system and you want to have it, control your TV monitor or control your DVR, that kind of thing, that's done over these CEC commands. The Raspberry Pi is recognized to know that, and you can program it to do that. So if you want to turn on your DVR or turn your monitor on and off, you can do that. The Odroid board I was talking about that I was thinking of trying, that one, from what I understand, does not have that ability. So if you want to set up a home media system, you probably want to go with a Raspberry Pi and not an Odroid. But I don't have a home media system. I've got a 20-inch monitor. that's the extent of my system. So for that, this works just fine. And see anything else want to come? I think that's about all I can think of here. Let's see, anything else in the menu? I find, editing the panel is really easy. See, like if you want to add something here and let's see, panel settings. So if I want to add, say, I want to add, let's move that. I want to add Minecraft. I can do that, and then I'll switch it up and down. See, now I've got Minecraft up there. So it's really easy to customize, and then you can change the whole panel system up here if you want to. Panel settings. Oh, do it here. So you can control what's up here. You can turn the head spacers and so on. Run battery monitor, and so on. I will say that up here in the upper right-hand corner up here, there's a CPU monitor. I've never seen anything go over 50%. Usually on the old Raspberry Pi, I can regularly peg this thing. This one here, I can never go over 50%. So I think really the limiting factor here is not so much the processor as it is just I think probably memory built on the board, only 1 gig. And the fact that this is a relatively slow processor, but it never actually maxes it out. So, anything else? Just a basic LXD desktop, so easy to change over. Anything else I can cover? Any other questions? Nope. Okay. Well, I guess that's it then. thanks for coming. I appreciate you coming up here today. And if you have any other questions, feel free to send me an email, and I can try to help you out.